Welcome, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to partake in this really wonderful conversation this evening. This is a Portman Lecture in the Spirit of Entrepreneurship. So I want to talk a little bit about what that is, and then we'll introduce Monica and hear all of her wonderful remarks. So the Portman Entrepreneurial Leadership Fund was established at Dartmouth in 2004 by the Portman family, William Portman, Robert Portman, William C. Portman III, and Virginia Portman Amos. And the fund is designed to foster an understanding and appreciation of small business development, entrepreneurial activity, and risk-taking, and the role that public policy plays in shaping its course. The Portman Lectures in the Spirit of Entrepreneurship bring to campus cutting-edge policy thinkers and practitioners in the areas of small business development and entrepreneurship. So, with that having been said, today we are very fortunate to engage in a conversation that we're titling Women, Entrepreneurship, and Atlanta in the New South. And we have an esteemed alum, Monica Delores Hooks, class of '92, who's the executive director for the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative that's based in Atlanta, Georgia. The mission of the organization is to elevate, engage, and empower entrepreneurship through women. Their work involves public, private, and community partnership, and has created over 370 jobs and invested $2.1 million into WEI businesses since 2015. So really interesting work. And this evening we'll be talking about sort of a conversation with historical perspective, highlighting the leadership and policy initiatives coming from the city of Atlanta and focused on economic mobility for women. A little bit about Monica before we let her take the show away for us. So prior to WEI, she had a successful career at Sony Music Entertainment with roles in product management, international marketing, and business affairs. She is an entrepreneur herself. She is the founder and former CEO of a marketing innovation agency called M-Oracle. And she's a graduate of Georgia Public Schools, which I'm excited to hear more about and how that plays into her work. She received her bachelor's degree from Dartmouth in government, and she received an MBA from another school that we also love, from UPenn's Wharton. As executive director of Atlanta's WEI, and Ms. Hooks is responsible for innovation policy, entrepreneur workforce programs, financial capacity building, as well as entrepreneur retention and development as it pertains to women's entrepreneurship through the city of Atlanta. So without further ado, I welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And a reminder to the audience to please put questions in the chat as you go, so that Sydney has some questions to field later. Welcome, Monica.
Well, thank you so much, Daniella. Thank you to the entire Dartmouth community, to the Portman Lecture Series and the Spirit of Entrepreneurship. This is such a treat to be a part of this conversation, to share some of my thoughts and some of the work that I've been doing with a great team and a great history and set of leaders to guide me here in Atlanta. So I will jump right into the presentation. I think that you guys should know that I am a native of Atlanta, and I love my city. So you will likely hear that passion come through in the presentation as I try and give you some perspective on how women's entrepreneurship is thriving here in the city, the shoulders that it was built on, and what we look to do in the future. So women entrepreneurship in Atlanta in the New South, and New South is in quotation marks. But I'll ask that we go into the next slide, because I'd like to start with a few very significant statistics. First of all, 1.9 trillion in total revenue is generated from women-owned businesses in 2020 or 2019, according to the American Express business report. Next slide. There's a 21% increase in the number of women-owned businesses, or there has been in the past 5 years. Again, from American Express, State of Women-Owned Businesses. Next slide. According to the Boston Consulting Group, women women-owned startups generate 10% more in revenue given a 5-year period when you compare it to our male counterparts. Next slide. And last but certainly not least, according to the McKinsey Global Institute, they found that over $12 trillion could be added to the global GDP by 2025 if we advance women's equity. I put all of these stats out front of the presentation because they really drive a guiding principle, a personal principle of mine, and certainly a principle of the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative, and that is that women mean good business. I think that there's perhaps a narrative out there just in popular culture that women may not be good at business for all sorts of reasons, but it's simply not true. Women make a dollar go further, women run households, and now we've got data to back up that women really do mean good business. Now that we've talked a little bit about women in entrepreneurship from a statistical perspective, I'd like to give you a historical perspective of Atlanta. Next slide. So Atlanta has a history of building coalitions to drive good policy. And we're going to stay on this slide for a few moments because I think it's really so important when you talk about where the city is today, but where it's come from. And I thought we'd take it all the way back to the beginning. You know, we're a relatively new city, founded in 1836 as Terminus. And Terminus was the endpoint of a railroad into the Midwest of the United States. It was to terminate at Terminus, which is Atlanta. And what you see there is the 0-mile marker, which is downtown, about 6 blocks away from our office building for the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. But very, very interesting that Atlanta was built to connect people. In 1848, it stopped being Terminus and became Atlanta, because as this image begins to show you, not only was it a rail port from Atlanta to the Midwest, but it was also providing logistics and goods and services through the port of Savannah, as well as east and west. And so the Atlantica Pacifica became Atlanta in 1848. Then we had the Civil War, and they burned Atlanta down. But it is a city phoenix, and that is our original, or that is our emblem for the city. We are Phoenix Rising. So I thought that was important to put there because Atlanta has a history of reinventing itself. Just after they burned the city down and we rose back up, we rose up with institutions like Spelman College and the historically Black colleges and universities that are based here in Atlanta. Spelman, which I have to, if my sister's watching, give a shout out to the Spelman alum and all of those wonderful Spelman women, and it will come up in the presentation a bit later. But my mother worked in the Atlanta University Center for many, many years, and I feel that I'm a part of that. But it's a testament to the institutions that came out of a darker period and institutions that have guided the city up into including 2021. Those other institutions include Morris Brown College, Clark College, Morehouse College, as part of the Atlanta University Center. In the early 1900s, Henry Grady, who was the editor and founder of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, we have one of the top trauma centers in the nation, the Grady Hospital, which is named for him. And his name will come back up, but he coined the phrase, the New South. And he coined that phrase because he was looking to drive a new perspective and a new narrative around the South based in business. And he was trying to really emulate things that were going on in the North with the Industrial Revolution. We will talk about that a little bit later. That term, the New South, was not, he didn't succeed in achieving that goal at that time. But we will talk about that a little bit later. As you get into the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, Atlanta coined a phrase, the city too busy to hate. There's a wonderful book that I suggest if anyone is a history, government wonk, a little bit like me, and you want to really understand some of the genesis of the political and policy nature here in Atlanta, read Where Sweet Auburn, or Where Peachtree Meets Sweet Auburn. This book is about two of our very, very famous mayors, Ivan Allen Jr. and Maynard Jackson. They both are sons of Georgia. And Ivan Allen's family was from North Georgia, and Maynard Jackson's family, he's a descendant of John Wesley Dobbs, from Savannah. And both of these men built, they were patriarchs and built wonderful families. But what's notable in this book is it talks about the city too busy to hate. It talks about the Auburn Avenue district, which is now called Old Fourth Ward, but it's a historical district in Atlanta. It was one of the first districts to be acknowledged as a Black middle class. And I thought there was a story in this book so interesting to me about Atlanta building coalitions for good policy. John Wesley Dobbs, Maynard Jackson's grandfather, worked with Ivan Allen Sr., Ivan Allen Jr.'s father, to build coalitions specifically around streetlights, or to build a voting base that could then vote to create policy so that there would be streetlights in the Black neighborhoods and policemen of color. And it was one of the first examples of the city working together for the betterment of the entire community. There are a lot of great stories in there, but that book is near and dear to my heart because I think that they really laid the groundwork for the personality of the city. In the 70s, you see an image here. I'm not sure how well you can see it. I wanted to throw a lot of images into this timeline, but you see the Coca-Cola symbol. In the 70s, this is a picture of Dr. King and Ivan Allen Jr. Dr. King is far left and Ivan Allen Jr. is right. And they are at Coca-Cola. This was after Dr. King had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And there was concern that people would not support him. I know that we really celebrate Dr. King now, but in the 50s and 60s, I don't know if Good Trouble was I don't know if people thought it was good trouble, but Ivan Allen did. And I, read a good bit about him. He was not a progressive person. He was not a liberal person, but he was a measured person. And when Dr. King was nominated for the Nobel Prize, they had a very illustrious dinner with all the business leaders and to congratulate him from the city of Atlanta. And no one had accepted the invitation. It wasn't until Ivan Allen called Bob Woodruff, who is the inventor of Coca-Cola, and said, I think that we have to set an example. And it was Coca-Cola, the business community, the private business community that became the leader in this space to say, no, we're going to embrace our city and all parts of it. I think that's really instructive as we talk about entrepreneurship in business and what the partnership is between civil and our civic and public and private institutions. Then we get into the 1980s, and you've got Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. But again, Mayor Jackson, Maynard Jackson, John Wesley Dobbs' grandson, the son of a Spelman woman, brought the airport to Atlanta. The airport, interestingly enough, was supposed to be in Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was one of the main drivers of economic mobility in the South for a long time, but they passed on it. And Mayor Jackson was smart enough and astute enough to say, well, we'll build it here in Atlanta. And it was with that initiative that's another rather marker and of coalition building to create economic mobility. With the airport, Mayor Jackson made sure that procurement opportunities were available to all people of Atlanta. Is one of the reasons we have such a strong Black middle class and such a rich history of people of color in the city. And you know, again, it just shows how business can drive really great solutions that are community oriented. And then in the 90s, you've got the Olympics. And the last two pictures show Mayor Jackson and Mayor Allen, the bottom, and at the top, it shows those mayors along with Ambassador Young, who was one of our mayors, Sam Manzel, who was also mayor before Mayor Jackson, and his name just escapes me. I'm sorry. It's Mayor Bill, and I cannot remember his last name right now, and I apologize for that, but it'll come back to me. So this is a history, again, of Atlanta building coalitions to drive good policy. Next slide. But now I'd like to talk a bit about the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative, which is the program that I lead. And I'd like to talk about it as yet another example of the city building great coalitions to drive great policy. So let me tell you a little bit about the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. Thank you, Bill Campbell, for the chat room. So Women's Entrepreneur, I was at Dartmouth when he was the mayor, so maybe I forgot. The Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative is the only initiative of its kind in the nation, and we think in the world, one that is municipally funded and focused on women specifically. It came to be in the fall of 2015, and it was a part of the Mayor Reed administration. This is our first selfie in front of the historic Flatiron Building downtown with Dr. Clementage on the right, who is the president of Invest Atlanta, a number of council members. You see Council Member Kwanzaa Hall taking the selfie. He was just elected to serve out the remaining term of John Lewis's term. And if you look really hard, you would see me because I was a part of the initial cohort. But a program, a 15-month program, focused on 15 exceptional entrepreneurs with the purpose of making sure they have co-working space, they're able to build their networks and their relationships throughout the city, and that we are providing them with the foundations that they need to scale those businesses and become a real part and a real driver of the economic mobility for the city. Let's go into the next slide. I think I talked about, or I think that Daniella talked about the mission of the initiative. It's to engage, elevate, and empower entrepreneurship through women. Again, we state it that way because the women mean good business. So we think that if women are involved, entrepreneurship wins. The second slide, why we do it. We do this because we believe in economic mobility. We believe in economic resilience. We believe that women are critical to that because they are drivers of our community. And Mayor Bottoms, when she became our mayor, and this is our second cohort, she really elevated that that North Star for the city and for us, that this program helps to contribute to resiliency, mobility, and economic development. We're really proud of our leadership in this space because we know that even though Atlanta continues to have a really strong middle class of people of all races, all genders and ethnicities, there's still gaps that exist. And you still need to have programs in place to address those gaps, perhaps where we've fallen short in the past. to make sure that we can address them in the future. Next slide. So how do we do this? Well, the program started in 2015, and in 2018, it moved under the umbrella of the Invest Atlanta, which is the economic development agency for the city. And with that move, and once I came in as executive director, we really tried to impart a strong framework for establishing foundations for these women, for these 15 businesses, for these 15 months. Again, we're an incubator. We are not an accelerator. And you would be surprised how many brilliant women are out there running great businesses that still maybe need help understanding team building, or they might need help understanding what procurement looks like for a city or for federal government contracts. Or they may just simply need some help understanding bookkeeping so that they can make that $500,000 to $1 million annual revenue with ease and go on to be a great candidate for investment, be it equity, be it debt, whatever the case may be, but that they have longevity. So part of that is we put 4 pillars of programming in place. It starts with business analysis, which is all strategy work. We use best practices in entrepreneurship to establish these strategies. Things like business model canvassing, SWOT analysis, critical assessment planning. In the business analysis stage, we do everything that we can to impart some strategy to these startups, because we think also as women, I think personally as a woman, you need strategy as a part of your toolkit. It's not about just doing everything and running really, really hard as fast as you can all the time. And I think especially for women, because there's so many different parts of our lives that come into play. Women are caregivers while they are CEOs at the same time, and they're caregivers for their children or they're for their parents. Women are responsible for maintaining a lot in the work-life balance that may make it challenging to pursue entrepreneurship. So in this program, we really do try to impart strategy and give them tools in this business analysis piece of the program. The second pillar is learning and leadership development. We think that you should leverage your strengths, and when you find out where your weaknesses are, you have to create opportunities around those weaknesses. And that's what the second pillar and module is about in the program. We do everything from startup mental health to startup legal to startup marketing to startup operations, startup sales funnels. As a CEO, you need to know a little bit about all of these things to get your business off the ground. And those are the things that we do in learning and leadership development. I will tell you that we also really, really lean on our community partners as a part of this program. We have entrepreneurs come in and speak about, really to pull the curtain up and speak about how they've raised funds, how they've been able to expand, what programs and relationships in the city that they felt were most effective. And it's been a really wonderful exercise, because now we've got community, people in the community have skin in the game. And that's a really, really good thing. If you want to see the next startup become, or the startup today become the next Coca-Cola. So we approach all of those things in learning and leadership development, and we impart and we partner with our community partners. The third pillar, strategic partnerships. We believe, for many years I heard first of all, women in entrepreneurship is a great story. Everyone loves to hear that women are starting businesses and doing well at it. I don't think I've heard someone say, oh, I'm not interested in that ever. But there is, I believe, a bit of a perception out there that people say, well, I really want to support entrepreneurship, but can I really give them $1 million contract? We've all heard stories where that didn't go well. So I want to and the program wants to take that off the table. And we think that with the first two modules, addressing all the things that I discussed previously and including our partners, once we get to the strategic partnership stage, our Fortune 500 are going to have heard about these companies. They will have been engaged with the companies. They will be able to help them accelerate their business in a way they wouldn't if they were not involved. Our strategic partnership module is not just about a strategic partnership with a corporate entity, but it's about pitching and creating partnerships with your investors, or pitching and creating partnerships with your community, et cetera. We really try to take a holistic view of what partnerships look like for a startup. And then lastly, we have funding opportunities, which is our fourth pillar. And in those funding opportunities, what we try to do, two things. First, we try to address financial literacy. Making sure that people really understand the difference between debt and equity, whether they need to take either of those tools or instruments as they're growing their business, understanding that there are opportunities for grants, or maybe if they're just what I think is the best entrepreneur and their business makes money, they can finance their business and put themselves in the strongest position for any opportunity moving forward. I'll give a shout out to MailChimp, Atlanta's startup. Ben never took any money, and he's built a fantastic business. And I challenge my women to try and emulate what he did or what he has done. So those are the four pillars. And I think that Daniella mentioned earlier, with regard to the impact, we have since 2015 created over 370 jobs for the city of Atlanta. And we have garnered over 2.1, it's closer to 2.2 million in capital investment for our entrepreneurs. We've had 3 cohorts to date. We are currently in the 3rd cohort, which I'm leading now. And that's been a treat in a pandemic, but we've learned some things and we've done well with it. I'll go to the next slide. So now I want to bring us back to the New South. And I want to bring us back to the story of Henry Grady. Henry Grady coined the phrase the New South because he wanted to compete with the Industrial Revolution in the North and wanted to reposition the South after the Civil War. Interestingly enough, he did not develop any coalitions to drive his vision. In fact, many of the initiatives he started were still siloed. So you had quite a few people sharecropping, and the city really did not employ or really embrace the idea of economic mobility for all of its constituents. And so Henry Grady's New South was not effective. And in fact, in Atlanta, if you say New South, people will kind of give you the side eye because, I don't know that we think it's that new. I think, these things have been building for some century and a half now, and we think that they are a long time coming. So when you talk about the Industrial Revolution, some of the images I have up here right now, on the right, we've got some incredible entrepreneurs out of Atlanta, Jill Burke-Solomon, who runs Google for Startups, and has been featured in a number of magazines, Fast Company and Inc. for her AI software for industrial machinery. You see Dr. Rashana Novelis in front of her, who was featured on the Super Bowl last week for her startup, Enrich Her, where she helps to fund women in their startups or for underserved women in entrepreneurship. At the bottom, you've got Jasmine Crow, or not Jasmine Crow from Gooder. This is about sustainable food and making sure that there's no waste, no food waste. Jasmine's fantastic. You may have seen her on NBC, or she now takes all the food waste for Delta, for all of our a number of Fortune 100s, and repurposes that food for people that are homeless or don't have access to food, so that it's not thrown away. And so those entrepreneurs, I think, speak to this new revolution that we're having around data and technology and a new digital age. I think that it's important to note that they're building the next Coca-Cola and the next Fortune 100. And I just firmly believe that all the solutions of the future, a good number of them will come from women. And then this image on the left, which I just adore. I know that Stacey Abrams is an international celebrity now. She's certainly really special to us here in Atlanta, a Spelman graduate. And I think that, that's yet another example of, her work is not new. It's been a long time coming. That institution to have been, born here in Atlanta has generated some of the greatest thinkers and policy makers that we have to date. Stacey herself is an entrepreneur. She has a factoring firm where she helps startups and entrepreneurs really fill their accounts payables in a timely manner. That was before she helped turn Georgia purple. But again, I think that all of these images and these stories drive the larger point that Atlanta has a history of great coalitions. We have a history of great business. We have a history of positioning business and community and entrepreneurship in a way that everyone succeeds. And I think it's one of the reasons that people really look to the city now. They may not know why they look to the city now, but these are some of the reasons that Atlanta is such a special place to be a part of and to drive an initiative like the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. And with that, I will close my presentation and open it up for question and answer.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. For those that are joining us, please feel free to put some questions into the chat, and Sydney will be moderating those in just a moment. I have a lead-off question. So, and in fact, I have a bunch of questions, but I like starting. I like starting with the challenging question. I'm curious. So you talked a bit about a thriving middle class and all of the elements that are coming into place to help support that, including the great work that you're doing. And I wonder what holes you see from your perspective that gaps that currently exist, maybe future programs like yours that aren't yet in place where you see an opportunity for some good work to be done.
Well, there's still some gaps in the pipeline with regard to women being prepared for entrepreneurship. And I don't know that that's unique to Atlanta. I think that there's a narrative out there around entrepreneurship, and I think it's the Hollywood narrative. It goes something like this: I'm going to graduate. I have a great idea. I'm going to pitch it to one or two people. I'll get $20 million. Then I'll be on the cover of a magazine and I'll get a television show. That's not what entrepreneurship is. And it's not what, when we say, such a large part of our workforce, our business community are made up of small businesses. Those are that story I just told. Those businesses are the outliers. It's the Main Street businesses. It's the mom and pop shops. And one of the main gaps we've been talking about at Invest Atlanta, because a number of the women that came into the program, we kind of started, it was we just want to support women. We want to support women in entrepreneurship. But what does that mean? There are lots of different levels of entrepreneurship. You can be early stage. You can be a high-tech growth entrepreneur. You could be Shake Shack. That's still considered a small business. And all of those are very different types of businesses. But a good number of the women that were interested in the program were what we call Main Street businesses, and they're lifestyle businesses. And so one of the big gaps is that we want to make sure that they're tech enabled. You know, this has certainly come up here in 2020 and 2021, that now more than ever, you've got to make sure that your business is, you're able to do business virtually, digitally. So we're really trying to fill those gaps. A good part of the workforce is not technically literate. And a good number of entrepreneurs don't even understand why they need to impart technology in their business. But you do to get, for a lot of different reasons. So that's one of the gaps. I think that, so maybe those are two. The first is that we need to manage their expectations. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, we need to make sure that they're really using some of the tools and the opportunities that are just a part of our market forces right now to build a good business.
That's great. I love the expectation realignment piece. It certainly isn't lost on people when they look at the news and they see kind of creating Hollywood quality celebrities out of just a handful of entrepreneurs. And the reality is that the path usually looks very different than that. And those paths look different up until they became famous as well. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Sydney, would you like to join us and bring in some of the Q&A from the audience?
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Monica. That was awesome. The first question from the audience is, could you tell us a little bit about some of the small businesses that you've worked with and how have they been able to hang on during COVID?
Oh, this is my favorite subject. I work with some extraordinary women. The 15 businesses in the third cohort for WE, and we do call it WE, the women's WEI, so that's our little acronym. We've been very fortunate. Again, we have 15 businesses, and I would say at least 13 of them, if not 14, are thriving in this environment. And it's because they're still small and nimble, and they've been able to pivot. We do a good number of workshops on how to pivot, how to figure out, you know, where you can gain some traction. So some of those standout businesses, I have to talk about Wonder Grub, sustainable protein. Grubs taste like cashews, and she's a wonderful Emory graduate. She's been a part of the startup ecosystem just step by step over the last 3 years, starting out of Emory Start Me, and then she was a member of the Center for Civic Innovation, and now she's with the WE program, as well as having students at Georgia Tech in their capstone program work with her on her IoT technology. So Wonder Grubs and sustainable protein, she's developed a new process to process grubs, and she currently has a container that on the Beltline. I don't know how many members of the audience know about the Beltline. It's very similar to the New York High Line, but we were first. It came out of Georgia Tech, and it is a city project to encourage mobility and interactivity, and it's a walking path that connects all the city neighborhoods in a perimeter on an old railroad track, because Atlanta was started out of railroads. So ATC Wonder Grubs, sustainable protein, winning all the ag tech challenges out there. People need sustainable foods these days. Another entrepreneur, Hype. Hype is an educational program, and she targets middle school girls for computer science. She's become a darling of the ATL Black Tech scene, and Christina herself is a computer engineer, left mid-career, which happens to many of the women in our program. And she has probably contributed to the education of over 500 girls in last summer, with partners like Cox Media, United Way, Coca-Cola investing in her, because she has put together a process and a program that can be managed virtually. And she's just doing very, very well. another standout, the secret cocktail, Victoria. Victoria's fantastic. She's a nurse, and she trains nurses on how to have their own nursing schools. So she's training our workforce population for future pandemics, and she's awesome. And she has processes for all 50 states, because it's not an easy thing to figure out how to start a nursing school, but she did it. And she's hiring people. I think she's got 5 staff members now. When she started the program, she had 2. Those are a few examples of the women in our program and of the things that are happening down here.
Awesome, thank you so much. The next question is one that I think is particularly important as well. And it's, how does your organization reach into the schools and community to encourage young girls to think about becoming an entrepreneur?
Oh, such another great question. So, well, let me say this. We are building the bike while we're riding it. So the program is, to me, the program is a startup. And I say that all the time. I say that to the mayor and anyone who will listen, because we're still getting our feet underneath us. But how are we reaching the young women? So to date, we have not had a particular strategy in place for that, but it's something that I've acknowledged and understand after working with the program for about 1.5 years, that we do have to address our pipeline. We have to make sure that it's really strong, and that people have the knowledge base to pursue entrepreneurship in a way that they will succeed. So to that end, we've actually just been awarded a grant that will help me to extend the programming, so that it's not just focused on the 15 entrepreneurs in the program, because that's very high touch, right? But now in this virtual community, I do virtual workshops all the time. So it seems to me I need to extend that to the broader Atlanta community. So you asked about young women and how we're reaching those. It looks like we're going to get a partnership with a major sports franchise in Atlanta. I won't name the name yet. And we will be receiving proceeds from sales of their merchandise. And we're going to use those proceeds to drive pitch competitions. And we're going to use that franchise to really advertise and make sure that girls and young women in college and middle school and high school are aware of these competitions, and they essentially can be a part of the process. They can step their foot in the door. They can come out here and pitch and say, I've got an idea, and we're going to award them grants out of those competitions. But the point of that, and partnering with this franchise that has, a bigger megaphone than I do right now, will be to access that pipeline, and specifically the pipeline in high school and in college. I have a couple of great interns, one from Georgia Tech and one from Spelman, and they're constantly trying to help me drill down this information and make sure that it's relevant to a young woman who may be 15, 18, or 23 and need this information. It's so much better for them to get the information then, as opposed to when they're 43. So we've recently engaged in some partnerships to help us expand the programming and expand our reach. And we are going to target specifically young women in high school and college through these pitch programs.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. The next question is, has the WE program been replicated in other cities? And if it hasn't, what do you see as the main barriers to replicating it elsewhere?
It has not been replicated in other cities yet. I don't know. So maybe, we get a lot of questions. I mean, over 20 cities have visited Atlanta and come to the program, I think, with the idea of trying to emulate it. I've even been in contact with some of my Dartmouth classmates about this initiative in other states. So I think that it's only a matter of time before we replicate it. I would certainly like to replicate it. Being a part of the program, though, and understanding some of the barriers. I was speaking with my colleague, Dr. Clementich, who runs Invest Atlanta, and we were speaking about there is an inherent friction in the program. We are, part of a public government agency or quasi-government agency. And for anyone on the call, you guys know entrepreneurship is go at the speed of light. You just don't have time to wait or time to get, something signed off or 6 or 7 signatures. And so that's an inherent friction in the program. Let me give you a real life example, COVID. We are not able to work in our offices. And I understand that. I understand why the city is not having people in the office. Well, the women in my program and the office space that we provide to them is a contract with the city. So they have not been able to use our office space. That's a real challenge for them because their businesses have they're still going. So, that is a thing. And in the program, actually, while it started in the city and with a particular fund, I'm currently trying to take the program into a nonprofit because I have to raise an operating fund moving forward. We really have a finite fund, and it's important that we raise monies for that. That could be a potential challenge. I think that there are some initiatives out there for women. I think that it is also challenging to fundraise. But I will say that based off my conversations and Atlanta has a special card, so I'm happy to play that. But that could be a challenge. I don't think that the program should stay tethered to that budget. It's not practical, nor will it. So I think it's important for us to establish that nonprofit designation and push forward with how we manage the public-private angle of the partnership.
Thank you. Our next question is, I saw that venture funding in Atlanta hit a 5-year high in 2020 at $1.9 billion. Do you see this trend of Atlanta as a venture-backed startup hub increasing, and what aspects of Atlanta's evolving tech startup ecosystem are you most excited about?
I do see it evolving. There's actually a great report out of Wharton that was published in December. It's the SAGE report, and this is their 3rd report. I think they said something like last year in 2019, or 2 years ago, but you understand, the number of firms investing in women was something like 17 or 22, but now the number is in the 80s. So, this is a premise of gender lens investing. It goes back to the earlier stats that I talked about in the presentation, the stats saying that, women are good business. Like we provide strong returns. It's not a favor, it's not charity. So I think that there's a broader trend going on globally, and certainly Atlanta will be able to leverage that. For people on the call, I don't know if you know, Atlanta has a really strong history in fintech. Payment systems like global payments, First Data came out of Atlanta, and that was in the 80s, maybe earlier than that. I don't want to, but those are huge corporations. So we are a natural fit for fintech. I see a lot of social impact entrepreneurship coming out of Atlanta as well. Just because, again, I think it's in the DNA of the city. It just kind of makes sense to make sure that the business is doing good. I talked about Gooder with Jasmine Crowe, repurposing food that's just being wasted. One of our entrepreneurs from the 2nd cohort, Jen Graham, Civic Dinner, she is a prominent partner with Facebook. She has an entire process about how you can really drive and inform good conversations to build good communities. And so she's done really well. And the gentleman who was in the picture, Joey Womack, his firm Intentionally Good, which is supported by the Kapoor Foundation. He's done a lot of really great work because a number of those firms actually started at his hackathon 10 years ago. So I think fintech, I think social impact. I think I talked about a couple of the women in the cohort now that are really strong social impact, potential social impact. And, you know, I think Atlanta, I think you're going to see a lot of underrepresented founders coming out of Atlanta. A lot of women are moving here. One of my cohort members, she's one of the top 20 Latinx founders, but she moved from New York to Atlanta because she wanted to build her business in Atlanta. And her mom moved down here. So, I think, you know, because a lot of these founders were not able to get funding maybe on the West Coast, a lot of them were not able to get funding in Atlanta, frankly, a decade ago. I did some work with the Atlanta Tech Angels for a number of years, and you know, our history on investing in women is not strong. And the woman who runs the Atlanta Tech Angels is a woman, and she's a mentor. And I've had these conversations, and neither of us saw the strides that we wanted to make. But all of those are areas I think you can watch, and you'll see some good things coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answers so far. I think we have time for one more question, and it's in relation to Georgia's politics and the recent election of the senators Warnock and Ossoff. Mm-hmm. And someone asked, can you comment on what economic issues you think Congress should address and policy solutions in relation to entrepreneurship and business development?
I'm sorry, restate the question one more time.
Yeah, it's just, can you comment on what economic issues you think Congress should address and policy solutions in relation to entrepreneurship?
That's a big one. That is a big one. I would like to see more work done with opportunity zones. There's been a good bit of talk about that within Invest Atlanta. The Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative, the building and the real estate is in an opportunity zone. And I would like to see more work in that space. Right now, we don't have any data. It's still an idea because we don't know. We don't see the results of it yet. And those opportunity zones, and particularly in Atlanta, which is really a real estate town. I mean, really a lot of money down here is in real estate. So I hope that those programs like an opportunity zone don't become yet another easy way for investors to get tax incentives or investment, and it doesn't contribute to the community. So I think to that end, it's probably really important to have really good definitions about agency within those opportunity zones, as well as what is the desired outcome. I don't know how well defined that is. I would certainly have some thoughts on how it should be defined for women and in communities specific to Atlanta. I think there has to be continued public-private work. I had a conversation with the Arthur Blank Foundation not so long ago, and he's invested a lot of money in Atlanta. He's one of the founders of Home Depot. It's still a Fortune 100 company. He owns the Falcons and a good bit of what they call the West Side development. And back to some of those gaps with economic mobility and economic development, those gaps exist because of larger business issues. And so you kind of have to mitigate for them, but you can't do that if you don't understand the community on a granular level. So I don't know that Congress can help. I think I think Congress and federal government can help with big ideas like opportunity zones, but the execution of that is on the local level. And it requires a level of transparency between both, as well as working with people like an Arthur Blank or that type of an entity to continue the traction. Because all of you guys know entrepreneurship is about good traction, right? And if not, it just dies on the vine.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone. Sydney, thank you very much for moderating the questions. Professor Reichstetter, thank you so much for hosting this event. And Ms. Hooks, thank you so much for telling us about all the exciting things that are happening down in Atlanta. And we're happy that you could come back to Dartmouth, even if it wasn't in person. We hope to see you in person in the not too distant future. Thank you to everyone in the audience. And I just want to mention that next week, we will be hosting Yale Professor Ann Alstott, who will be discussing the public option beyond healthcare. We hope to see you there. Thank you all.